Welcome to Mojo Talks, where we explore the world through stories. I'm Mayur Chennagiri, visual storyteller and your host. Welcome to Mojo Talks with Mayur Chennagiri. And today I'm excited to introduce Siddharth Raja, a seasoned commercial lawyer with nearly 3 decades of experience. Siddharth brings together a sharp legal expertise and a deep understanding of technology's role in modern commerce, including the impact of AI. Beyond law, he is passionate about history and even runs his own heritage company, Nandi Valley Works. And today we will dive into how law interacts with the real world issues, technology, culture, and explore how historical insights enrich his practice. Siddharth, welcome to Mojo Talks, and I'm glad that we have you here today.
Thank you so much, Mayur. Pleasure to be here, and absolutely lovely being here.
Awesome.
The program has been some time in the making, but looking forward to this.
I was just thinking, an interesting thing is, all my guests so far, you all have a connect to Bangalore. Like Ryan is an old Bangalorean, you
Yeah.
guys studied together.
Correct.
And I met KVK Murthy through Ryan during his launch. And then again, this connect. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, yeah, that's true. Actually, Ryan and I go back all the way to St. Anthony's. So that would be in the late 70s. So that's almost 50 years.
Wow.
Right? We were classmates all the way through till the end of school. Yes, the Bangalore Connect for sure is there. Especially, at the cusp of what I would say was just before all of the change that Bangalore has witnessed in the last few decades, just before that overtook Bangalore, right? Because my recollection of Bangalore was of a much more calmer,
Quieter,
slower,
greener, slower.
quieter, greener, locale. And I grew up in, what was then known as the cantonment of Bangalore, right? Which is just off MG Road, basically, not far from where Ryan is, actually. And so it was a very different world that we grew up in.
You've also been on the forefront for the last couple of decades. You've seen technology evolve, you've seen the corporate law evolve, the working styles evolve. How does it feel witnessing these changes, and what is that you have seen in this area?
That's several things to be unpacked there. Let me go one by one. I think there are probably
Maybe we could summarize that in the creative space, because most of our audience are people who come from the creative space. I know there's an overlap, right? So maybe if you can share some insights on that.
I think first of all, if we unpack the point on technology, right? A combination of various things. I mean, there are now so many technological developments that people are involved in, use on a daily basis, etc. That they're all efficiency tools.
Yeah.
Right? And so even in what many may regard as a dull profession, especially for outsiders, us lawyers find that technology can be a game changer, in terms of the way in which we approach our issues. You see, I think the foundational, principles that we were taught as junior lawyers to, always examine the facts of a case, whether it be in court or in the boardroom, whichever room, examine the full facts, distill the facts more fully. And in fact, several seniors used to say the more you crunch the facts, the law will stare at you in your face, right? And if I can stretch the analogy a little further, after all, to some extent, we are also, artists.
Artists. You have to be artists.
Right? We are, I guess all professionals are, even dull chartered accountants might be considered artists. But jokes apart, I think there is an artistic element in the way in which we craft a solution.
Exactly. I've had arguments with CXOs. They're like, "Oh, you're you're a photographer. You quit your job. You're such a creative person." And I would always have this argument saying, "Listen, whether it's a techie or a CA or a lawyer, you had to be creative. right? Unless you're creative, your mind will not look for alternative solutions.
Correct. That's right.
Or you're not able to analyze this in a different
That's
way.
right.
Otherwise, it's like data driven, and there's no information assimilation and a solution.
Correct.
Isn't it? So you have to be creative in every field.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, sir. But you see that fundamental ability to analyze, craft, critique, whatever you want to call it, play with your, the tools of your trade, right? The tools of a trade for a chartered accountant are numbers and financial analysis, etc. The tools of a trade for a doctor are his ability to understand the human body better. The tools of trade for an architect is greater, square and compasses, perhaps. I don't know, various things, civil engineers, etc. Our tools of trade is actually a volume of law, right? Which is essentially a set of rules and regulations. Yes. There's a big debate, by the way, in the law as to what is the law, right? I remember when I went into law school, one of the first questions that we were asked is, what is the law, right? Okay. Which is a very philosophical kind of question, right? Is it a set of rules that govern society? Is it something which is a lot more normative that builds up over time? Et cetera, et cetera. And I won't get into that. That can be fairly esoteric. But I think the point I'm making is that that ability to distill what applicable legal principles are in any particular case is also takes some amount of creativity in terms of the ability to craft a solution. Whether you're in court or whether you're in a boardroom, ultimately you are seeking a solution either to win in a court or to get a better deal for your client in a boardroom. And that ability to distill those facts, etc., whatever it might be, reams of material of a contract, it might be reams of material of evidence, for instance, is something that has to be developed over years. And I think it comes from an appreciation of the chain of events, right? And as I keep telling colleagues of mine and juniors, saying, go back and let's ask the question, what is the relationship between the parties? Let's ask the question, what are the facts that they're examining? What's the situation? What's the circumstances? And that kind of helps. And so on the broader question of, the creative arts, right? Two things that come to mind straight away, right? The ability to demonstrate creativity in a technologically developed world is now much sharper, right? What Walt Disney may have taken years together to have his team put props up can now be done within a matter of days through the use of technology, right?
Or even seconds and minutes given with AI, the way it's
precisely, right? So it's just that the expression is much more, here and now. And consequently, I think what that means for the human in that milieu is the ability to adapt to it. It's the same, by the way, in my profession. It's the same in the world of medicine, for that matter.
Correct.
I think that's really something that technology has hastened. It hasn't necessarily changed the ability for humans to continue to think it through, but you have to be more nimble. You have to be faster on the uptake, that speed, and extremely sharp to respond to different types of avenues of creativity that are now thrown open. So you just take an example like, say, Kathak, right, as a dance form. Right? Now, with both production values as well as potentially with AI having some artificially generated figure, right, maybe even a robot to do some of this. This highly sophisticated dance form which goes back several centuries. What does that mean to, an artist? You have you have someone there who's an exponent or even a junior, and you're having to deal with something like this, your audience is expecting so much more. And maybe you're kind of overtaken or you adapt to it.
But again, on that note, Siddharth, there's a very thin line about copyright. Or, I don't know how does that work? Because, for example, if the example of Kathak, right? there's someone who's practiced over the years and developed their own style and
Yeah.
this thing. And then you have AI that goes through zillions of data and creates its
Yeah.
own form. So, is it plagiarism? Is it infringement? Is it copy? I mean, that's a very. Is it an? I don't know. It's an ethical question.
It's a combination. So let me break that down. I think there are maybe 2 or 3 aspects to it. One, of course, is a pure legal question. I think that's perhaps easier to deal with, right? I'm no copyright expert, right? But I can certainly distinguish between the form of a particular piece, for example, a composition, a prescribed piece of composition, and its variation in terms of its expression, right? Now, that, of course, is a classic debate in copyright law, right?
Yeah.
That you have, in trademarks or in other copyright, is it the idea versus the expression? That's as fundamental as an expression of the copyright law as one can, begin with. It's a beginning point. It can only be a starting point, right? But let me actually give you an example of this. Some years ago, almost a decade now, I had the opportunity to meet one of India's leading Kathak exponents in Ahmedabad, a lady by the name of Kumudani Lakhia. You probably have heard of her, right? She's now in her 90s, right? She's sprightly 85-year-old when I met her, and she runs this well-known, dance school in Ahmedabad called Kadamb. And I was talking to her about various things, and obviously the art form itself was the center of a conversation. And clearly it's an art form that she grew up with, but has improvised and innovated in her own way, right?
Correct.
I think, again, AI may take away some of that, in the sense it might sharpen it, it might, infringe someone's existing copyright. That's an easier thing to deal with, the legal issue, right? But I look at it more from the, the societal or the ethical or the general, the societal issue is it should be encouraged, right? If you look at AI as being an instrument through which human endeavor can be refined, then it must be welcomed with open arms.
I'm so glad you said
because
that.
I think, sorry, just to complete, my point is, today's debate, I'm not saying it's the only kind of debate that is occurring, but it's always, the law's remit and therefore the system's response is always, there's a new thing on the block, how do we regulate it? Right? And there's obviously, because it's a new thing, it may be infringing someone's right. That's a pure legal debate that I think can be sorted out as a legal issue. But if you look at it from an ethical, moral kind of thing, it needs to be, well, I won't use the word regulated nor controlled, but it needs to be managed, right? And if you understand that, right, and are able to better express your own art as a result of what you see out there, right, human refinement will continue. There were 2 juniors of mine who are currently in the middle of they're doing a fantastic job. They've got a new legal tech startup using AI for lawyers, right? And, they told me something which is so, so true, is that it is not that AI will replace the lawyer. It will replace the lawyer who does not know AI.
Law. Yeah.
To which my response was, boss, I am far over the hill and gone, brother. Maybe, not too long, far away, I'll be 6 feet under. So, I really don't care beyond a point in time. But I'm saying this flippantly. But I think the point is that, the youngsters have to adapt to that. I keep evangelizing this. I don't at all claim to be able to give you an answer on copyright issues of such magnitude. A lot of it depends on facts and circumstances, right? But I use the second point, the non-legal point, which is to say, can you use these technological innovations to help improve your own art?
Exactly.
Right? And that is true, by the way, of your own profession.
Yeah, exactly.
And that I think is the next level of human endeavor. right?
Because
And that
end
is the
of the
key.
day-
Human endeavor will never go away.
Yeah, because end of the day, you might have all the data, like in your profession, like previously you would have to read case books, go through zillions of this thing, but
Still
today,
need to.
still need to, but at least today with AI, you can give references.
Oh, yes, of course. Oh, that, by the way, now you're moving on to another topic, which, this is something where I have a particularly strong view, and that is it will certainly improve efficiencies. Just without going into too many details, one of the things, that these guys are doing is the ability to crunch existing documents to evaluate risks and liabilities. The world, as far as we are concerned, the commercial world is all about managing risks and allocating liabilities, responsibilities, right? If you look at it from that prism, when you invest, when you buy, when you sell, when you lend, whatever it is, when you provide services, you need to know that your counterparty, the buyer, the seller, the service provider, etc., is able to has what should I say, the wherewithal to do that, and does he carry any liabilities, etc., or should you be concerned about anything that might be a risk. Now, previously, all of this was document review and analysis. Some lawyer had to go through several hundreds of pages to determine where the risks were and where the responsibilities and liabilities lie. AI can do that within a matter of maybe a couple of hours, maybe minutes, and then to get someone to review that work product. So I'll give you an example. In our classic legal due diligence of, say, a buyer acquiring shares of a company, teams could be constituted of 10, 15, 20 lawyers doing this due diligence related work for in excess of a couple of weeks. Now that crunching, that analysis, that critiquing of the documents can now be done in the matter of days. Of less. In fact, the AI itself can produce reports in the matter of minutes, but you still need someone to review it and make sure that it's not spewing junk.
Exactly.
Because as you know the famous saying, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Right? So you have to be very careful with that. So it's also a question of checking. So efficiencies are hugely improved.
But end of the day, Siddharth, the starting point and the ending point with AI, with tech, with whatever the revolution that's happening right now is the human capability. Because the input still has to come from you.
Absolutely.
And end of the day, that's where the ethical point comes in.
Well,
right?
there will come a time where even that human input will start to reduce because the technology has learnt enough to be able to act emotionally and subconsciously and factually as a human. That's going to be, some of it is already visible, by the way. I think it's still early days, generally, but maybe in the decades to come, that will overtake the human element. Now, that is where the future inflection will be. I can't tell today what that might entail. It's a tough one. Really, someone has to deeply gaze into that crystal ball and come with a lot of experience and understanding. Perhaps we'll all start to get there soon enough. But until then, the human element is critical. I'll use that word. It's not entirely able to displace AI, which is quite obvious.
Yeah.
But it will continue to be critical in the assimilation of the outcomes of AI.
But somewhere what worries me is if that day should come, which it will obviously come, is it going to dumb the future generations?
Now that, by the way, that is another interesting issue you're touching upon. You remember we began by saying there's the technology element, but I didn't go on to the second piece, which is the human element in the sense of not so much the player. So let me take an example, right? So if you look at, say, junior lawyers today, they are obviously learning the ropes of AI in order to enable their own professional development. right? But they're also in the wider world consuming a lot of AI for themselves. You see, so there are two aspects to it. I guess nothing unique again. It's obviously there's a professional element, a work element, if you want to call it that, and an element in relation to your personal lives. Now, what I find is that this new generation who've kind of grown up with AI, with technology, I should
Technology,
say,
yeah.
broadly, sometimes gets numb to it. You know,
Which is happening to the current generation.
It is.
Okay, let me take a step back. Not current generation, that includes us as well. Right? I mean, we interestingly, again, I was just having a very similar conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about, when, say, decades ago, few years ago, when Kargil war happened, or any of these catastrophic events happened, right?
yeah.
The way we reacted back then, we were actually emotional. We would say like, it would impact us for days. But with the bombardment of information today, I think...
That, by the way, that is, it's a low-hanging fruit to analyze, because that passivity,
that's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Your passive consumption, by the way, we may not have grown up with it, but we suffer from it.
Yeah.
The impact of that passive consumption is to some extent mind-numbing. I mean, I can't think of a historical parallel. Perhaps some of the propaganda films that existed in, say, some of the fascist countries in, Germany, for instance, or Japan, just before the Second World War, is that it numbs the mind into becoming a kind of an empty bowl.
Yeah.
That can take in some good stuff, but it usually, unfortunately, takes in the worst. And you to some extent, people are suffering from that, by the way, because we're such passive consumers of content of all types, including in the professional world. We aren't reacting or responding, I should say, not even the reaction. We're not even responding properly. Many of the, I suffer for it from some time, but, for someone who has never seen, another world where you had to think on your own without access to information, right? In fact, at some points in time in the past, we used to crave more information. I was talking to a student yesterday who's helping me on some research. It was on some historical aspects of Indian company law. I actually spent most of the time in my conversation with her telling her, listen, the content of what you find is slightly irrelevant at this early stage of the research. I need you to find out the source. Where can we find this information? What is it? And I said the source of this information has to come from an appreciation of the way in which our company law evolved during the colonial period. So I said, if that's the question you're going to ask yourself, logically, the next question is, who made the law in the colonial period? There was no Indian parliament, but there was an Indian legislature in Delhi, controlled by the Brits. There was a Governor General and Council who dictated most things. And then, of course, there was the government in London. So I said, now let's understand the way in which laws were made in 1910. Can you tell me, if someone wanted to make a law on British India, and if there's, sorry, I'm just digressing slightly, but if there's anything that the Brits did was to make sure that they always had a legal basis to do whatever they did. They may have rampaged and pillaged and done everything else, but there was a legal basis. There was a piece of paper which said, here's my justification. Right? Good, bad or ugly. And for that, I said, that's what I'm after. Now, I want to know how that law emerged, because that very same law still subsists in some shape or form in our current law. So I've moved along. So what I'm saying is that, coming back to the point on the younger, I won't use the word younger generation, on this ability to crunch greater detail, there's so much of fluff out there that it's easy to say you've got technology. There's a professor of mine who used to say, when you go in to do a review, right, you know that you have the Xerox machine available to make photocopies of the books that you're looking at for, in those days, 10, 15, 20 paisa a page, right? Don't photocopy thousands of pages because you are simply transferring the research from the library to your room. And he says soon it will go into the bathroom and down the toilet because you won't have the time to look at it.
Correct. So, but I just want to go back on that. I know we are slightly moving away, but you mentioned that about the laws, the basis for the foundation of laws that we follow today was way back during the British era. Is it time to change that?
So there has been a constant debate on that in India. Not just of late, but even earlier. It may have been more sharply defined today. I think the answer lies in two responses, actually. One is there's a whole bunch of laws that have to go into the dustbin because they have simply have no purpose. They've lived their purpose, outlived it, and they need to be discarded. The late Bibek de Broy, the economist who passed away a few days ago, made that one of the causes of his work to declutter India's colonial law. And I think it was not just simply that they were colonial, but because they were of no use.
They've lost their relevance.
They've lost their relevance, and says we must at least declutter, like you declutter your cupboard every now and then of old clothes which are of no use. You do the same with the law. So that's one area. Like for instance, he pointed out, if I'm not mistaken, it was him. There was right up to the 70s or the 80s, believe it or not, I think in the Madras government, or Tamil Nadu government, they used to appoint two people to a post called Lord Linlithgow's Keepers or something like that. I may be getting the name wrong, but they were, and they kept getting appointed every year. Some class 4 employee would be paid whatever, and would get superannuated, get pension, this, that, and the rest, the bureaucracy, until they discovered that was a creation in the 1930s when Lord Linlithgow was Viceroy of India, and he needed two staff to take care of either horses or cows, I can't remember which, right, that he had, and so these people were appointed to that post. And that executive order kept getting issued every year into the 70s or the 80s. It just shows how stupid our system was, right? And so that was one aspect of clearance of some of those colonial laws. I think a deeper one is to declutter the system of some of the colonial principles. Now that's a tougher one to do.
Because then there are so many players.
And by the way, it can't just be that because it was a creation of the British that it is necessarily bad, right? By that logic, you should get rid of our railways, right? You see, so that you see that you can deconstruct that argument to what we call reductio absurdo. You can reduce the argument to absurdity, right? So you have to be very careful. You're saying substantially there are things in our legal system that need to change, right? Because of the modern era in which we live. Modern because technology has changed scenario. Modern because India is no longer committed to socialism but a more capitalist economy. Now those are political questions, and that's what I wanted to bring in at my third point on the question you asked, that this so-called decolonization, right, is a decolonization based entirely on the politics of government and the people in power. Now whether you're left, whether you're right, whether you're center, it is always a contentious issue because someone could do it with a particular perspective that someone else will have an objection to, right?
Just going back to your point, Siddharth, earlier you mentioned, right, how the propaganda, the films were done and how it was pushed to numb people. Maybe that's happening in a subtle way or maybe in a very, very clear way in terms of the kind of information that is being fed. Where we were at one point, we would actually take things very lightly, not too serious, too emotional about it, but had the capability to, filter them out or consume what we want. But today, with the kind of social media manipulation is happening, maybe they've just taken a page out of history and in a different form.
In a different form. No, absolutely. See, there's always some playbook to go back to.
Yeah.
It may have been in a different age, at a different level, and especially to go back to the period between the two world wars and the growth of the fascist dictatorships in Europe and what we saw in Japan as well, where it was brainwashing
Correct.
at a humongous level, unimaginable level, right? For its times, and now if you look back, that whole system was founded entirely on brainwashing, right? And I don't think people realize it until we get to youngsters these days who may have been brainwashed from the very start, and they have their very distinct right-wing ideology, for example. And it's a sad state of affairs because, I mean, to some extent you are, I mean, I don't want to use the word, but I mean, I look at it as in some way a manifestation of some insanity, really, honestly. I'm not saying don't hold a view. By all means, hold a view, because that's what you're entitled to do. But hold a view that also is able to appreciate the counterpoint, take it on board, deny it or respond to it. You may continue to hold your view, right? But there's a certain level of human engagement, there's a certain level of maturity and experience in understanding, appreciating, and responding to it. Yeah? That, by the way, was the hallmark of the fascist dictatorships, right? A lot of people subsequently tried to explain it, that, this is a particular example, that Germany was overtaken by this fairly, I mean, there's actually a well-known historian on Hitler, Ian Kershaw, in one of his books, says that the rise of Hitler is akin to the gutter ascending to power. Right? That's how bad it was, right?
Yeah,
because that's what it was. It was nothing but absolute gutter and gutter snipes who came to power. Right? Now, they tried explaining it afterwards that it was only a narrow set of people who did this, and that the German people and the nation are guilt-free. Oh man, that's far from the truth. And I've only read a little bit about this, that the Nazi party represented merely a small sliver of Germany, but that in reality, after the war, when people looked back with the benefit of some hindsight, right, realizing that it was a combination of total brainwashing, right, and strong-arm tactics, but indoctrination to the extent of just mind-numbing stuff. I mean, this is a fascinating subject. I'm sure there's work out there as to how some of those elements are being replayed today through social media, where you're constantly only hearing one thing. You're a passive recipient, which is what most Germans were, and that therefore you internalized it in such a way that you were willing to turn on your neighbor, who you were neighbors with for decades, to turn him or her or the entire family to the concentration camps. In other words, snitch. You became snitches. But, and the moral dilemma of that, by the way, afterwards, is that many Germans thought the narrative turned out to be, we were not responsible. Someone else was. To which, of course, people like Hannah Arendt and the others who came later talked about the entire culpability of the nation, right? In fact, there's a well-known book, I can't remember who the authors are from the top of my mind, I can picture it in my mind's eye, called Hitler's Willing Executioners. And that was an indictment of the entire German nation, right? And there were, of course, complete class 1 criminals in that list. There had to be guys who pulled the trigger or who opened the gas canister in the gas chamber. Absolutely. There are those. But the silent majority,
whether the top guys,
not just the top guys, I'm talking about the entire nation as a whole, were silent spectators. Now, that's a huge indictment. By the way, if I can draw a parallel, and I'm not going to get into this, another hugely contentious issue. Can you blame the entirety of the Jewish population of Israel for what this government is doing? I don't know. History may turn out to be different.
Yeah.
To say that, oh, I am not in any way other than through my electoral vote able to control this. And in between elections, it's the Israeli government. I will stage a protest, or if I don't, that I'm somehow culpable by simply being an Israeli.
Israeli, yeah.
Just by membership of a group, do you become culpable? Oh, that's a hugely contentious issue.
But even to draw parallels, like, if you see what has happened in India, in Kashmir, in many parts of India, right? Neighbors turned against each other. We've seen genocides. We've seen mass killings happening. But maybe it's just history repeating, but are we learning?
No. I think, it's a combination. That, of course, is a golden question. We've had conflagrations largely on communal lines for several decades now in this country. Although we don't hear of it as much these days. There may be incidents or two happening, which, of course, keep coming up in the newspaper, or they get completely silenced, which itself is a problem. But anyway, that's another debate, by the way, the role of the fourth estate, the journalists. That's another big issue. For another debate, another day, right? But on the point that somehow these conflagrations between peoples and communities usually has some political overtone, right? And you take the partition, you take the displacement of the Pandits from Kashmir, you take the anti-immigrant violence in Assam. Several, or further south over here, the issues between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka over the sharing of the Kaveri. All these are in some way class, community, particular constituencies against another for different reasons.
If you remove all that, there would have just been neighbors. There would just been
but
folks.
That itself, was it only, in some respect, you could say that you were neighbors, yes, but, you were waiting for the opportunity to out the other. I don't know.
And I was just about to add to what you said, even if you go back, I'm talking about the early independence, 1940s, 1947.
Partition.
During the partition time, what happened in Bengal? Right? I mean, it's like history is repeating, but are we really learning anything? No.
That's a cliche, by the way. History, if you don't understand it, you're condemned to repeat it. It's a bit, I think it's a lot more difficult. There's a well-known, and I'm paraphrasing, one of your English poets, I think it was Coleridge, who said, if only history was not like a lantern, right, that you would place at the back of the ship to cast light on the waters behind us, but the other way around. So I don't think history. This point is there is two responses on that. One, the lessons of history are only learnt by the players involved in them. So directly. Now that fades over a period of time. And the person who comes later, a successor, hasn't learnt that because hasn't lived it. So the lived experience of history must then lead to my next point, which is that lived experience must result in an institutionalization of that memory. And I give you an example of that. For whatever it is, the Holocaust against the Jews led to such a great deal of institutionalization, led by a community that was ravaged,
almost wiped out.
And they lived to tell the tale and made sure that others heard it and kept it for posterity. So whatever you might have against Israel and the Israeli people, there is no denying the fact that the outcome of the Holocaust is still felt today. Right? And I know there are issues as to how Israel is currently being perceived in the world. I'm not getting into that. All I'm saying is the outcome of the Holocaust, the horror, was institutionalized through various means and mechanisms, whether it be through film, whether it be through books, whether it be through art and plays and culture and music and museums and institutions like the UN, the war crimes tribunals, all of that now means that when it comes to a repetition of such kind of horror, it will never happen. Except that someone will turn around and say, but listen, that is precisely what happened, and no one talks about it, in the Congo.
Yeah.
With all of that horror in the last 10, 20 years, by the way. That's my point. The Congo's horrors have not been memorialized. They're not recorded. But the Israeli people, the Jews, made it a point to imprint that onto the world. And we therefore have it. Now that is the lesson from history. Not that because you can't expect the people who lived through it to live forever.
Correct.
But
And
the successive generation
might not even appreciate or
exactly.
experience
They will not have any experience of it.
And
the
we don't
only
want
way,
them to experience that either.
That's true. The only way to do it is to have it memorialized in some shape or form. And even going through a memorial like there is in Berlin. I haven't been to Berlin, but I can tell you that memorial to the Holocaust, where you have to go through rows of, it's like a labyrinth, leaves on your mind that, apparently it is a very poignant, very sharp, very evocative thing. That is the memory that you need to preserve. You see, that's the only lesson that history teaches us, by the way. Memorialize it, because the people who lived it are going to die. And the people who come later would have no experience of it, and therefore will be condemned to repeat it, because they have not they aren't exposed to memorialization. By the way, this very delightfully kind of dovetails into the topic we were discussing on how the social media driven world is so numbing.
Correct.
That's the other point. If the two worlds meet, there's disaster. The absence of memory and the mind-numbing nature of social media.
You're doing so many things.
Correct.
Right? I mean, we'll come to the point of heritage walks and Nandi walks. You're doing that while you're practicing your corporate law. You're part of BIC and many such organizations. You're working around issues around Bangalore. How do you manage your time? How do you keep your sanity?
Well, no. I would say that it is because of all of this that I am able to keep sanity. I used to say that if the heritage walks could pay the bills, I would do only that, right?
Yeah.
But someone said, hang on, I think you should look at it slightly more positively from your perspective, is that because you do a good job at your work and the profession that you have the ability to do that. I said, well, that's certainly a much more positive way to look at it. But I can tell you that there are definitely challenges, no doubt about it. And there are times where colleagues of mine and my partners will say, hang on, Sid, you can do a lot more in the work, in the profession, and you need to do a lot more in your practice. And that comes and goes, but priorities clearly are the work, number one, which keeps me going. Two is, of course, the walks. And I would say third is this academia / other interactions with civil society. That is in that, I think in that order of priority, really, right? Sometimes there's a tension between the two, and it takes some appreciation of that, and sometimes a little prod from, in this particular case, from my partners who said, listen, I think we need to recalibrate you a little bit and get back. So this was only recently, and then I thought to myself, maybe I've been doing too much of this other stuff. And so, but it comes like a cycle.
Because there's always something learning that comes and that comes into...
But to answer your question, it is not easy to balance. There are many a time when I myself think to myself, I've taken on too much and I've bitten off truly much more than I can chew. And, well, anyway, let's see. Que sera, I guess.
Exactly. Well, this time when you traveled with just your two daughters, right? How was it? Because I did a similar trip with my elder one about a year and a half back,
It's an interesting question that
especially being teenagers.
that's true. They're not, toddlers or whatever. That's a totally different ball game for sure. I think there were, again, I'm trying to rationalize this, but the first thing that stands out is that you are forced to look at what you have previously seen through new perspective. So this is not my first trip to Zambia.
Yeah.
It may well have been different that we were making our respective first maiden trips to Zambia together. But I'd been there before, actually twice before, so I knew what I was seeing. In fact, to some extent, I was just like the guide because I knew my way around, right?
Correct.
So, but to see these places through fresh perspective and fresh eyes, especially, young, impressionable eyes, very, very illuminating. Very, and I'll tell you how. It kind of reinforced both the caring and the caring from my side and the love from the other side, you could say, And I think that really was the highlight of the trip because, for instance, most of the trip was an outdoor experience, right? Zambia is a country of the vast wilderness. Just to give you some perspective, it's the size of southern India, the peninsula. That's the 4 southern states.
Wow.
And Maharashtra, right? That's the size of Zambia. And it has a population of about 20 million, which is roughly the size of Bombay. Right? So you have 20 million people in a country the size of the southern peninsula. So you can imagine that loneliness or being alone dominates. Right? Because you can go kilometers and kilometers, miles and miles without meeting people. Because there's only so much.
Did that give you a chance to spend more time with your daughter?
That's right, it did. Either actively or just being together in a car being driven. Like for instance, we did a long drive from the Kafue National Park, which is in, I would say, central western Zambia, down to the south. We were driving from the Kafue to Livingston, which is where the famous Victoria Falls is. Right? Now that is about a 6 or a 7 hour drive. Actually, it took us about 8 because the roads are nothing but actually dirt tracks. Honestly, they're compacted earth, by the way. There's no metal roads. So you need a 4x4 that can literally fly over. And we were in a Toyota Land Cruiser or Land Rover or something like that. So it was like rugged 4x4. And in fact, I told the girls, I said, as we started off, I said, join me in counting the number of vehicles we pass. Either the ones that we overtake or the ones coming in the opposite direction. And I said, let's ignore two-wheelers because in some of these village hamlets, there are a number of people with two-wheelers. So let's ignore them. So we'll talk about cars. I think we counted in the whole 8 hours until we hit the city of Livingston, I think we counted something like 12 or 14 vehicles. Both ways.
That's it.
Okay. We stopped in the middle, for instance, because he wanted to just it was quite warm. He wanted to let the vehicle cool a little bit, right? And I think he also wanted to take a loo break, our driver. So we stopped in the middle of nowhere. And there was a village not far away, some hamlet of a few houses. But when I say village, these are hamlets of five people, right? 5 families, because that's the size. And then you're there and it's of course completely silent. Right? And vast open spaces. And you start to think, of course, you start getting a lot into yourself. And I could sense that the girls were doing that also, by the way. Thinking about, various things. It's just, the mind just takes over.
Yes, yeah.
And but being together in the vehicle meant, you interacted every now and then. And there was, this is where we are, we're heading here, So for instance, at one checkpoint, we had to stop and we walked around. The guy had to basically grease some palms to let us through. Okay, but that, and it's vast open spaces. It's and of course natural beauty, the Victoria Falls, the safari in one of the game reserves that they have. The game reserve, by the way, the Kafue National Park, is almost 25,000 square kilometers.
Wow.
It's huge. So, and vast open spaces. I saw a sign somewhere at some petrol bunk, when we had to fill to get some gas, also use the time to pick up some snacks. It just said for sale, 200 acres.
I just hope some particular minister from Karnataka is not listening to this.
Well, they're all very fertile land, by the way. Both fertile or they've got tremendous stuff beneath it. Zambia is known for its copper and its other minerals that lie right beneath the soil. And I have a very good Zambian friend. Actually, he's my professor from law school in England, a Zambian guy, who says that, you throw some seeds onto the soil and put some water and it will grow, and that's it. You just have to chuck something and it will go. That's how fertile it is. And he said that as a result, we are, as a nation, as a people, quite lazy, because we are surrounded by vast spaces and fertile land, and so they're generally a little lackadaisical, laid back, as long as I get my whatever little food every day and I get something to keep me amused, but for instance, we stopped. I remember when I went first, by the way, when I was all alone, when I went, and we stopped somewhere I needed to get some water or something. And the guy, when there were a couple of locals who came rushing to the car, and, they were asking for, he says, you have some cigarettes, you have some cigarettes, and so that seemed to be the currency
there.
I
had a similar experience in Cambodia. We went up to Priyakan, which was on the border of Thailand and Cambodia.
Oh, wow, that's a long way away from Phnom Penh. That's to the west.
And so to the base, you go in your regular car, from base up to the top, you need a 4x4. And we were told to just carry a couple of packets of cigarettes. That's your currency. And we were on the no man's land, literally.
Oh, between the two.
And we just had to give them 2 cigarettes.
Some border guards?
The border guards, you give them some couple of cigarettes, and you could actually pose with the bazookas and with the
that
weapons.
Experience. By the way, so I know we are now digressing a little bit from the question you raised, but I should tell you, for that, by the way, my foremost experience of this, border guards and the thing, is when we made a trip to Uzbekistan almost 20 years ago, 16 years ago, and we were driving by car from Tashkent to the Fergana Valley. The Fergana Valley, by the way, is the is the birthplace of Babur.
Babur, yes.
Right? So as we were crossing into the Fergana Valley, unfortunately the Fergana Valley is also the meeting place, a very fertile valley, like Kashmir. It's the meeting place of several countries and fought over, like Kashmir, by all its neighbors. So the Uzbeks have the largest section of it, right? And they've had a lot of patrolling. This was in 2006 or 2007. And I remember the driver had to get out with our passports, go to the checkpost as we were entering. A lot of checkposts, do some paperwork, something. It was taking longer than usual. I was wondering what's going on. And it turns out that this guy, the driver, walks back to the car, along with one of the security guards. And I said, oh, what's happening? Some problem? The guy, our driver, who could speak a smattering of English, basically told me, he says, he wants to meet you. Because Indian. I told him Indian. He saw the passport. He came to meet you. So I said, okay, now this is, the old story, that you go into the old Soviet Union, especially the southern the stans. They will all come and say, oh, Raj Kapoor, and sing Avara Hu. I thought that's what is going to. You know what he came and told me? It's fascinating. He came up to me and said, India? I said, yes. He says, Mithun Chakraborty. I said, huh?
Mithun da.
And then he says, I said, how do you know him? Then this guy explained, apparently there's some serial or some movie that has been dubbed into the Uzbek language, and the most well-known one is Mr. Mithun Chakraborty, right? And then he starts singing, guess what, by the way? I am a disco dancer. So, India has soft power.
I mean, of course.
Anyway, but coming back to the trip, I think it was a great bonding exercise because it's clearly helped. I mean, moment you travel opens your mind, opens your perspectives. There's a German word for it, by the way, called Weltanschauung, which means world view, right? That is the thing, right? And I think it was, who is it? It must have been, what's his name? Mark Twain, who says, right? If you don't travel, no, you've never lived or something. Or
like
if you've not traveled, then you've never opened your eyes. Yes, exactly. You know?
But so I'll tell you the experience that I had, especially with Ishani when I traveled. We were in Mafushi, Maldives, and for us, both of us have taken up into diving, the open water certification and all that. So diving has become our thing, and that 1 week on that island with nothing to do, because only thing that you can do is dive. And there's no malls, nothing, beautiful beaches.
I can imagine.
So it was probably one of the best trips, because we ended up spending time, at least as a father of a teenager, like
I agree with you.
it kind of changes, the conversations were different.
Yeah.
And also you were talking about planning, them picking up the restaurant.
Yeah.
This is something which me and Priya have been doing. So when they were fairly older enough, I guess, is that we say we go to this destination, you figure out the schedule, what you want to do. You balance it out.
Yeah.
So it kind of, they do their research and this thing. Yeah. But Mafushi trip for me was an eye-opener, going with a 16-year-old, that conversation.
So, with my passion and interest and abiding passion, I should say, for anything historical. Yeah. This trip, Zambia or wherever else, it's that, it's the sense of the outdoors and of course some amount of history as well, for sure. But I think that connect in just the beauty of the place, right? The vast open spaces and the rest. And let's face it, Africa, large parts of it, is very much like India. You can either love it or you absolutely hate it, right? And there you have both, right? I mean, there are Indophiles and Indophobes as well, and there are similarly in the. I mean, it's a fascinating continent. I've only seen a very small piece of it, and the Zambians are particularly hospitable, nice. Zambia, for instance, has never had a military government. It has never had a coup. There was an attempt at a coup which failed, but they've had peaceful democratic transition all the way through, right, for 35 years now. So this is a little bit of a beacon of, Botswana and Zambia, the two neighbors, by the way, are examples of that. And they're shining examples of it. So it's a safe country, and entirely safe, right? Of course, there are pockets of, it's like in Delhi, you won't go to certain places, right? Or even Bangalore for that matter. Right? Unless you're accompanied by someone local.
Siddharth, I just want to take a short break here, come back, because this has been a very interesting conversation around legal technology, and there's a lot more I want to ask you, especially given that we started this conversation about Bangaloreans and we being Bangaloreans. So let's come back take a break, and in the next episode, let's talk more about what you're doing around Bangalore.
Happy to.